Hello, everybody. Sorry for the slightly late start. I have tonight with me a special guest, Sri Dharma Pravartaka Acharya from Dharma Nation, who many of you requested that I invite on last time. So here he is. And he would like to start us off with some mantras, and then I think we'll go straight into reading the chapter and follow our usual format. So if you would please, Acharya-ji.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. First, before the mantras, let me thank you, Philosophicat, for having me on. This is an absolutely wonderful thing that you're doing, going through Bhagavad Gita, and it is absolutely my pleasure to be here. And yes, I will just say Gayatri mantra. For those individuals who in the audience know it, they can feel free to follow along. Om Bhurbhuva Swaha Tat Saviturvaranyam Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi Dhiyo Yona Prachodayata. Jaya Shriman Narayana. Very good. Oh, I think you're muted.
I am indeed. Good thing I had a guest here tonight to point that out, or I would have done the whole stream on mute and wouldn't have noticed.
90 minutes later.
It's just one of those days, you guys. Like, it's the dumbest reason why we're getting a late start. So I was getting set up for the stream and my air conditioner wasn't working, and it's like a bazillion degrees and humid here in this climate. And so I went into a panic, like, well, I can't do the stream without the air conditioner. And I'm like calling up my landlord and being like, get somebody out here to fix this now. And she's like, well, he can't be there till 4:30 and the stream starts at 5. And I'm like, okay, well, I'll go down to my other little building that has an air conditioner. And then that one didn't work. And I texted her again. I'm like, this one doesn't work either. And she's like, do you think maybe the power grid is down? Because my house is on solar power except for the air conditioners. And I'm like, oh my gosh. Like, I just went complete retard for no reason. Now my air conditioner is working again, but the guy's still here fixing it. So I'm over here sweating to death in the other house that has no air conditioning just to do the stream. So I hope you guys all appreciate my sacrifice.
But here you can practice one of the main teachings of Bhagavad Gita, detachment.
Exactly. That's what I said to myself as I was like grumpily lugging all my computer gear over to this part of the house. And I was like, as long as the stream still goes ahead, that's all that counts. And it wouldn't be the first time I've sweated through a stream. So I'm back here with my little parrot mural, and you know what? Everything's working. I'm not on mute. I've got the book ready, so let's dive in. This is a relatively short chapter that we have, but as with all of these, they're pretty packed with wisdom and depth. So I'll start, and for anyone who's new, this is the version that I'm using just because it's the only version I had when I started these streams, and it's fairly readable. But as always, I do encourage people to look at multiple translations, and we might just discuss some of the discrepancies in regards to those tonight as we go. I'm sure Acharya-ji will have a few comments related to that because I know this is not your preferred edition, but it's suitable for our purposes, I guess. So this is chapter 7, Wisdom and Realization. The Blessed Lord said, listen, Arjuna, I will tell you how you can know me beyond doubt by practicing non-attachment and surrendering yourself to me. I will teach you the essence of this wisdom and its realization. When you come to master this, there is nothing further that needs to be known. Of 10,000 men, perhaps one man strives for perfection. Of 10,000 who strive, perhaps one man knows me in truth. Earth, fire, water, and wind, air, mind, and understanding, and the eye sense. These are the 8 aspects of my physical nature. This is my lower nature, but beyond this, I have another higher nature, the life that sustains all beings in the world. Know that it is the womb from which all beings arise. The universe is born within me, and within me will be destroyed. There is nothing more fundamental than I, Arjuna. All the worlds, all beings, are strung upon me like pearls on a single thread. I am the taste in water, the light in the moon and sun, the sacred syllable Om in the Vedas, the sound in air. I am the fragrance in the earth, the manliness in men, the brilliance in fire, the life in the living, and the abstinence in ascetics. I am the primal seed within all beings, Arjuna, the wisdom of those who know the splendor of the high and mighty. I am the strength of the strong man who is free of desire and attachment. I am desire itself when desire is consistent with duty. All states of being, whether marked by sattva or rajas or tamas, proceed from me. They are in me, not I in them. Because most men are deluded by the states of being, they cannot recognize me, who am above these, supreme, eternal. But those men who turn to me can penetrate beyond this wondrous power of mine, this magic created by the 3 gunas. Others are deluded by my power. They do not attempt to find me, and in their ignorance sink into demonic evil. There are 4 kinds of virtuous men who worship me, Arjuna: the man in distress, the man who seeks power, the man who seeks wisdom, and the sage. Of these 4, the sage is the most praiseworthy, unattached, steadfast. That man is supremely beloved by me, as I am by him. All of these are noble-minded, but the sage is my very self. Calm, untroubled, he dwells in the ultimate goal, in me. At the end of his many lives, the sage unites with me, thinking, Krishna is all that is. Great souls like this are rare. Men whose wisdom is darkened by desires, men who are hemmed in by the limits of their own natures, take refuge in other gods. But whatever the form of reverence, whatever God a sincere devotee chooses to worship, I grant him an unswerving faith. Empowered by his faith, that man earnestly seeks the God's favor and obtains the things he desires because I myself have ordained it. But fleeting is the reward that men of small minds are given. They will go to the gods they worship, but my worshippers come to me. Though I am unmanifest, fools think that I have form, unaware of my higher existence, which is permanent and supreme. Veiled in my mystery and power, I am not perceived by most men. Their deluded minds cannot see me, the unborn, the changeless, the undying. I know all beings who have passed and all who live now, Arjuna, and all who are yet to be, but I am beyond all knowing. All beings are born to ignorance, ruled by aversion and craving. This, Arjuna, is the primal duality that keeps them bound. But when a man is released from dualities, he can act purely without attachment and can serve me with all his heart. Those who take refuge in me, striving for release from old age and death, know absolute freedom and the self and the nature of action. Those who know me and the nature of beings, of God and of worship, are always with me in spirit, even at the hour of their death. Oops. So that is our chapter. I have for you, Acharya, I have a few comments and questions. So if you don't mind, I might just start off with those and interject wherever you feel like you would like to.
Sure, absolutely. And can I ask, just for reference, so this is the Stephen Mitchell translation?
Yes, Stephen Mitchell.
I read it once years ago, and it is a good translation, actually. Yeah, I consider it to be a good translation. A little bit more of an academic versus a devotional translation, but it's quite accurate as far as what you read. It's very faithful to the Sanskrit.
Yeah, I do feel like for the most part, it at least captures the essence where it isn't being translated quite literally. And it is a very readable version. Some other versions are a little bit, maybe a little bit too religious in the way that they speak, and I think it can be a bit difficult for a layman to grasp, or particularly a Westerner. I do usually, when I read this, compare to a couple other translations. Of course, you can find many of them online for anybody who wants to go looking for one if you don't have a copy of your own. So, he he starts off saying, of 10,000 who strive, perhaps one knows me in truth. This makes it sound like there's very little chance of success in actually getting to know God. So, is that what Krishna means here? Because I think some people could interpret this to mean that there's no point in trying because the odds are so stacked against them.
Sure. No, that's a very good question, actually. This is something that people do notice about this chapter, is when Krishna says that. And it's not actually meant to be something that is disheartening in any way. Oh, so few people will actually recognize God. Rather, what Krishna is trying to do here is to explain how, number one, endeavoring to know truth and to know God in a real way is difficult. It's not for everyone. So, thus, the Vedic path, the path of the Bhagavad Gita, as I've said many times, it's the opposite of an egalitarian path. It's not simply meant for the masses. It's not meant for everyone. It is indeed meant for that rare person who has all of the necessary prerequisites necessary to be on the path. What does that mean? Well, certainly intelligence, determination, sincerity, etc., humility, intuitive insight, all these various things that a person needs. But also what it points to is that, interestingly, the closer that you get to truth, the smaller your company becomes. And we see that in all walks of life. Whenever we see human beings striving for anything that involves excellence or something that is very rare, very difficult to understand, etc. How many MDs are there in the world? Oh, not many. How many of MDs? How many brain surgeons? Again, smaller number. So we see this just even in material life. But then spiritually speaking, also, this is the case. That we see that, I talk about this all the time. How many people claim, I want truth, I want God, etc., etc.? Most people will say that, Why do a lot of people say that? Well, they know it sounds good. They want to make themselves look deep in the eyes of others. Now, of all those people, how many really are endeavoring to know truth? Oh, now it's a smaller number. Of those people, how many are not just endeavoring, but endeavoring in a serious way versus playing around with spirituality? So new age concepts, etc. How many are really, really going deeply into traditional, authentic spiritual paths? Oh, now the number is smaller, and on like this, until it gets to the point where, indeed, to know the highest truth, truly the highest truth, is, again, not something for the masses. It comes to the point where that individual who has actual liberation, who actually has the ability to have full self-realization and to then have a direct experience of God, yes, that's a rare person. Now, again, this might sound a little bit disheartening to some, but for those individuals who really think about it, if God is worth attaining, should that not be the case? That God is not cheap, that it is indeed difficult to know God, and that, yes, the closer you come to God, you see that your fellow travelers just kind of fall to the wayside as you progress toward knowing God. And it comes to the point where, yes, there are few people who actually know God. What this should do, rather than dishearten us, is the opposite. It should help us to understand how great a gem, how great a diamond, how great a treasure it is to know God. And it should help us to understand just how wonderful this is. That is what Krishna is trying to communicate.
Yeah, and somebody in the comments has echoed exactly what you've said, that the verse has the opposite effect on them and makes them want to try harder and strive for it more. So I think that's a really good attitude to have towards it. So Krishna also talks about the material and elemental components of his energy, and he's saying that this is his lower nature, that he has a higher nature beyond that. And it sounds like he's saying that his higher and transcendental energy is kind of like an energy that includes all the souls in the world. So could you explain what the nature of this energy is and what the soul's relationship is to God in this context? How is it that the soul can be linked to God in this way, but still under material illusion?
Mm-hmm. Sure. And that's a deep question. It might take a little while to answer that, but I'll try to be as
Please indulge us. They're here to hear you, as am
I
I.
will still try to be a little bit brief. Um, Yes, God has multiple energies, actually. First of all, let me back up a little bit. When it comes to even the very word energy, again, this is one of these words that today in 2022 among spiritual circles is just thrown around like so many words, like love, like liberation, enlightenment, etc., where people don't quite understand what is meant by energy. When they hear spiritual energy, they tend to think of Star Wars, like the Force, something something very childlike, childish like that. No, we're talking about God's energy specifically, and in the same way that any living being has energies, we have our own powers. We can do things. We have our vitality, we have our intellectual power, etc., etc. Well, God also has his shaktis, his powers, his energies, and interestingly, they are infinite in number. We can know about a few and even then general categories, but God has many energies. But to break it down in a very simple way, the, let's say, two most important energies for our purpose and understanding are these two. And I will throw a little bit of Sanskrit at people. I know your audience are very intelligent, so it's not going to boggle their minds. Not too much, a little Sanskrit. One of these energies is Prakriti, Prakriti Shakti. This is materiality itself. This is insentiency, insentient uh, materiality in energetic form that then becomes enformed within the material world as everything that we see and name around us. So therefore, cup. We can call this a cup. But what is it really? It's materiality when you break it down to its atomic components. Well, this is what's called Prakriti. This is one of the energies of God. Another very important energy of God is what is called Tatashta Shakti. And there are several words for this, but this is the most prevalent philosophically in Vedic spirituality. Tatashta Shakti is finite consciousness. So, in other words, to use Western terminology, all of the infinite number of souls who are the children of God. That is considered to be another energy of God. In other words, what is an energy by definition? Something that emanates from a unitary being that then has ability to do X, Y, or Z. So we can see that's the case with materiality. Again, it becomes transformed, enformed in the form of shapes, name, etc. This is also true for this other spiritual energy that altogether comprises all of the unlimited number of souls in existence. That is called Tatashta Shakti. Now, what is the relationship between them? Is that what you had asked?
Gotta unmute again. Got like roosters in the background, so I thought it'd be a good idea. Yeah, like how is it that the soul can be linked to God, but still under material illusion, basically?
Good, very good. Okay, yes, I can definitely answer that. Again, from the Vedic perspective, now going a little bit deeper, now we're going to talk Vedantically. We're going to talk deeply philosophically. There are three reals in existence, metaphysical reals, what are called tattvas in Sanskrit. These are God, individual souls, and then again, materiality. So you see, those two energies I spoke about are two of these, but now we're including God as well. Now, starting with God, God is indeed that being who is that in which nothing greater can be conceived, that which is the origin of all things, that which is the sustainer of all things. That being the case, we individual souls emanate from God. We also have God as our source. Now, to make something complex very, very simple, we find ourselves now within the material world, interacting with materiality. But previous to our existence here, we had an existence in the spiritual realm. And that existence was one in which we had pure existence as what we truly are, pure consciousness. Now, at that time, our individual consciousness as individuals was not individuated. In other words, we had awareness, but we didn't have self-awareness. We did not have awareness of other. We did not have the ability to exercise free will, and we did not have desire, which would come about only with the three preceding things being there. But we were units of consciousness, and we had general awareness. Now, at one point or another, each of us as individuals existing in this, let's say, pre-fall state, we come to the point where we develop those. We have awareness of ourself. We have that, what in Sanskrit is called aham, I am. Then we have necessarily, having had that, awareness of others, awareness of other Atmans, etc. Now free will becomes operative. We have the ability to make choices. We also have desire. Now it's at this point, and again, this is before we fall into the material world. We are now really in the spiritual realm with all this that I'm speaking of. Now, having developed all of these necessary inherent tools of the soul, of the Atman, now, of course, we're faced with this very natural choice. We realize, all right, I am here, I am me. There are others. I have free will and I have desire. Now, with all these tools, now the question is, what do I explore? There are two paths. I can explore that path in which I am exploring, continuing to explore my true self, and then ultimately the self of myself, God. And I can explore in a healthy way, in a natural way, in a spiritual way that is in keeping with who I am as a soul. That's the upward path. That's the good path. But then there's the secondary path. This is the path in which I can explore an artificial I. I can literally, now realizing that, oh, I have free will, I have desires. Some people will, instead of wanting to dedicate themselves to God, instead they want to play with those newfound tools that they now have. You know, it's kind of like I described this to someone about a week ago in a funny way. It's like the Atman realizes that it has superpowers suddenly. What happens if you discover that you have superpowers suddenly? Well, you can choose to travel the world and do good toward others, or you can go crazy and become a self-centered monster. You see? Well, this is what happens to the Atman. Many Atmans will choose to dedicate who they now are to God. Others, however, will choose to create an artificial I, that is ego, what is called ahankara in Sanskrit. Ahankara literally means the I that is created versus the real I. That is false ego. Now, having chosen false ego, we'll follow the person taking the downward path now. Having chosen false ego, that person automatically and necessarily comes into contact with that which is illusory, that which is temporal, that which is informable, that which will allow the soul to explore its false ego, to, yes, create actually multiple fake identities, false I's. So they come to this material world, and what happens? I am a king, I am poor, I am a dog, I am this, I am that. And these are all artificial I's, artificial identities that the soul chooses in their illusion to follow. Thus, they find themselves in this material world of samsara, of constant reincarnation, chasing an artificial self that they think is the true them. This is the example that I've given many times, and it helps people to understand this idea of chasing an artificial self. You know, imagine, you know, there's a wall here on my right. Imagine if on the wall there's a painting, a portrait, and it's just a made-up character. It doesn't exist, not some historical person, you know. But imagine if somehow I went crazy and I started to say to myself, you know, yeah, that's me. That person in the portrait, that's actually me. Who this is, I don't know. That's me. And oh yes, you know, let me try to feed the person in the portrait. Let me give water and let me, you know, pet the head. You know, let me love that person because that's really me. Is that really going to serve the real me in any way whatsoever? No, I being here, I would starve to death eventually, taking care of that portrait. Well, it's a similar sort of thing. The real us is the eternal us. That is the Atman. That is the soul. That is eternal. That is our true identity. And in serving ego, it's like we're serving that fake character in the portrait, mistakenly thinking that it's us. So this is the connection between ourselves as Atman and then this material world. This material world, and to sum this up very quickly, this material world exists for one purpose, and that is for us to have the freedom to explore and to learn from our own lessons, such that in time, however many lifetimes it takes, we do indeed realize our true selves again, become liberated from this illusion, and eventually truly come to be with God in the spiritual kingdom for eternity, and in joy and in bliss and in happiness.
I really like the analogy of the painting. I think that's very helpful. Hopefully, people in the audience agree. So let me find my place again in my book here. Oh my gosh, look at me today. I'm just I'm just a mess today. Yeah, he says, all worlds, all beings are strung upon me like pearls on a single thread. I like that analogy too. I think that really very neatly illustrates how God connects all things, but is separate and distinct from them. And then he goes on to list these many examples of ways in which he's the main ingredient in all things, like he's the taste in water and the light and the sun and the moon and so on. And he says that all states of being, the sattva, rajas, and tamas, proceed from him and are in him. And this is quite different, I think, from this sort of new age idea that God is in everything, which is really a total inversion to what Krishna is saying, if I'm understanding this. But I mean, I can understand how somebody could get confused by thinking that the thread is running through the beads rather than that the beads are on the thread. And it's a subtle but important difference. Could you explain why it's so important to recognize that distinction?
Absolutely. It's a matter of causality. It's a matter of, like you said, understanding who is subject and who is adjective. So yeah, just philosophically speaking, linguistically speaking, for example, I always give the example that it is philosophically correct to say, oh, let's say God is truth, but it is incorrect to say truth is God. In fact, it's radically incorrect to say that. And a person, just a typical person listening to these statements couldn't even tell what the difference is. Well, the difference is that one is cause, one is effect. To say that truth is God, that is incorrect, because it's kind of like saying brown hair is a Chatterjee. No, that's incorrect. It's a matter of cause and effect. A Chatterjee has brown hair. That is correct. So in the same way, yes, God is the cause of all things. So that being the case, this is what Krishna is trying to say. He is the source and not the other way around. So all things exist within God.
Thank you. And he also then he goes on to say that most people are deluded by materiality, by Maya, and so they can't recognize him. Why is it that we end up subjected to Maya, to this illusion in the first place, and are unable to see God? Because my understanding is that only a fraction of souls are fortunate enough to get a human birth in the first place. And then, it seems like we then end up with what is for most people this insurmountable obstacle to knowing God. So doesn't that rather defeat the point of experiencing an earthly existence?
Sure, that's a very good question, actually. Yeah, a few people have asked that in the past, and yeah, it does seem like, oh, it's unfair that we're living in a realm where this thing known as Maya or illusion is operative. But the truth of the matter is, what we need to understand in order to fully grasp this relationship between ourselves and Maya or illusion is that we are choosing the illusion. That's the thing. It's not that the illusion is imposed upon us. It's not that God arbitrarily says, well, oh, here's a sincere person and they really want to know truth. They really want to know God. But, oh, here I'm going to zap you with the power of Maya so that even though you want the truth, oh, you're going to be led into delusion and led astray. No, that's not how it works. We are the ones who are choosing illusion. Illusion is something that is there, that is neutral, that by definition it's non-existent. If something is illusory, that means it's non-existent. We are choosing to embrace the non-existent. So again, the example that I gave before, how we can choose to know our true self or an artificial self. Well, that is our choice. And when we choose to embrace the artificial self, we are choosing Maya. We are choosing an illusion. We are choosing that which seems real but is not. And again, so many examples. You're in a movie theater. I know post-COVID, very few people go to movie theaters anymore, but I still like movie theaters. You go into a movie theater and it's dark and you're there with other people and you're staring at the screen, this massive screen. And let's say it's a good movie and you get really into the characters. And it could get to the point where you're so identifying with the character, you forget who you are. You forget where you are. You forget that you're in a theater. Indeed, this is the mark of a good movie and good actors, that you're so identifying with the character that, let's say, the character suddenly out of nowhere gets shot and you almost feel like you've been shot. Well, that's an illusion. The character doesn't exist. It's a movie. It's two-dimensional, etc. But we are so identifying with that which is of the nature of illusion that we think that it's actually affecting us. So in the same way, this is what the soul who chooses illusion does. Illusion is not imposed upon us. You see, no one forced us to go into the movie theater. We chose to go into the movie theater to watch something that was not real for our own entertainment. So that being the case, we shouldn't lose ourselves to the point where we forget who we are. And if we do, we can't blame the movie projector person. You can't blame the director of the movie. You can't blame the theater owner, etc. So it's the same thing. If we find ourselves in illusion, it's 100% because of that free will element, because we choose illusion. And we see that every day. Is it not the case that for those of us who are, let's say, very humbly, but yet wiser than the majority of people, is it not the case that we see the majority of people playing an illusion? They don't know what's happening in the world, whether it's any of the large topics that we're not allowed to talk about on the world scene. They take, what's the perfect example? The media is illusion, and yet the majority of people, maybe a large minority, I would hope it's only a large minority, believe every single thing that the media tells them. So they're living in an illusion. But why? They've chosen it. Why is it that you and I and many of the people in your audience have not given in to the illusion of what the media tries to artificially construct as a terrible reality? Why have we not accepted that? And yet some people have. Some people, due to free will, choose illusion. God doesn't force people into illusion. People freely choose it.
So, how does that square up then with this idea that, we should, we're fortunate enough to get a human birth, because in order to have that human birth, we are essentially choosing illusion. We're choosing a separation from God. So why would that be considered a fortunate thing?
Hmm. Well, regardless of the form of life that we're in, most likely we're in illusion. What is fortunate about being human is that we can self-reflect and realize that we are an illusion. You see, I know you love cats. I actually love cats too. I love all animals. But the typical cat doesn't suddenly sit there and start to contemplate, what really is my actual nature?
I don't know.
Animals,
I wonder sometimes.
I
I
know
see my
cats.
cat sitting with his gaze. He's just like absolutely like transfixed on one of your videos that's playing or something like that.
Well, if it's one of my videos, that's different. Maybe it's stirring his soul somehow through the cat facade.
I hope
But
so.
for the most part, other species are not capable of thinking philosophically, of self-questioning, questioning, who am I? What's the nature of reality? So the thing that's fortunate about being human is precisely that we have that intellectual ability, that we have that philosophical ability that lower forms don't. Higher forms do also. So the gods and goddesses, higher beings certainly can think philosophically. In fact, in many cases, better than humans can. But what is wonderful about being human is that indeed we have the ability to question our illusion. So while it's true that most humans are still in illusion, as humans, at least they have that ability that they don't need to be. If a human decides, no, I really want to do a serious search, and no, not that, I'm kind of bored and, I heard about a good book on Oprah on some new age idea. Yeah, let me maybe pick it up. No, people can choose a serious spiritual search. And again, whether they do or not is up to them. but the choice is there when you're in the human form, and you can indeed do that.
Yes. Well, thank you for that that explanation. Hopefully, other people had this the same question that is now answered. So, there is one, to go to like the translation issue and stuff, there is one that I'm not super happy about with this book. So this book renders verse 15: others are deluded by my power, they do not attempt to find me, and in their ignorance sink into demonic evil. And in another translation, the same verse reads very differently and says, four kinds of people do not surrender unto me: those ignorant of knowledge, those who lazily follow their lower nature though capable of knowing me, those with deluded intellect, and those with a demonic nature. And so I'm a bit disappointed that the one I'm using here doesn't include this, because I do think it's important to understand the four types of people who do not surrender, because it does describe probably the vast majority of people. And so of course many people are simply ignorant of spiritual knowledge, just as many people are too lazy to act on spiritual knowledge. And then of course the problem of having a deluded intellect seems to be very much a symptom of the new religion of scientism, just because it causes people to rely overly much on empirical knowledge and to deny that there's any other kind of knowledge beyond what their own cognitive processes can create. And maybe a minority have an actually demonic nature. But I think it's important for people to understand these categories in order to see if they might be falling into one of them. Wouldn't you agree?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And it's true. As far as why people do not surrender to God, there are indeed multiple reasons. You can't really, make it as simplistic as, oh, they're just demonic. I mean, some are, like you said. Those tend to be a small number of people. The way I've described it in the past, if you look at all of humanity, what you'll find is a small number of people on one end of the spectrum are extremely good people, meaning that it would never cross their mind to do anything unethical or immoral or harm anyone. On the other end of the spectrum, there is a tiny minority of true asuras, true individuals who are really what we call psychopathic today. The majority of people are in the center, and they're just kind of innocent, and they will veer slightly toward one way or the other. But yes, it's not that everyone who doesn't surrender to God is necessarily demonic. Again, I would translate demonic as being clinically psychopathic or sociopathic in nature, and that's something that's rare, and that's very extreme. Rather, the reason why people do not surrender to God are indeed multiple. In some cases, they can be quite innocent, and again, they just accept what they are told is reality as being reality. Like I was saying before, they just accept what the culture tells them, what the media tells them, what school tells them, what their parents tell them, et cetera, et cetera. So they're kind of innocent, but let's say you can imagine, let's say you were growing up in the former Soviet Union or East Germany or someplace like this, where the entire culture is telling you that reality is atheistic and materialist in nature. And you're just kind of an innocent person. What are you to do? You just kind of go along with the program, and the last thing in your mind is surrendering to God. Doesn't mean you're evil. And then there are other individuals who they are more, let's say, rampant materialists. In other words, they just really want to enjoy the material aspects of this world. They're hedonistic. They want to get high, and they want to party, and they want to have sex with multiple partners, et cetera, et cetera. And they're not really evil people. They don't want to hurt anyone. They're just into self-pleasure. And then we can give more categories. And then again, there's that minority of individuals who are demonic. In other words, they really see themselves as being at war with good, at war with God, at war with anything that is ethical, that is virtuous, etc. So yes, there are many reasons why a person would not wish to, let's say, pursue a path of God consciousness, ranging from just the innocent all the way to, yes, outright demonic people. But yes, there are different categories of people.
Yes, and he also talks about the four kinds of virtuous people who do surrender to him. So he mentions the man in distress, the man who seeks power, or I guess in some other translations it's worldly possessions or worldly status of some kind, the man who seeks wisdom, and then the sage who is actually situated in that wisdom. And obviously, of course, the sage is the most pure and noble since he possesses that selfless devotion. But I think it's very common for people to initially come to seeking God for one of the other reasons first. I think, for example, that being in distress and feeling like you can't cope with the world is probably a really good time to take shelter with God and put all your troubles in his hands. I personally find that's a really good time to practice equanimity, if nothing else. And certainly those who are simply curious about spiritual knowledge are on a good path, even if they're just approaching it intellectually to start with. But what would you say about those who are seeking God because of what they think he can give them materially? Like, why would Krishna include these people in this short list of the virtuous people? Because they are seeking to fulfill material desires in some way. Could you offer some clarity on that?
Hmm.
What?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And yes, it is interesting. A lot of people have noticed this, that, oh, yes, why would God include someone who is seeking material benefit, but turning to God for that? On the one hand, it sounds like like a hypocrisy, and it can be indeed on the part of some people. But this is the way that I've heard it explained by my gurus in the past who have commented on this verse from Bhagavad Gita, and that is this: if a person, let's say, has material needs, and not all material needs are bad. It doesn't mean that the person is greedy or anything like that. They might be, or it might just be that they're in such poverty that they can only eat every other day, and they need some money. It could be something even innocent and almost good like that. If a person indeed has material needs, if that is the case, is it not better that they at least recognize that God is the place to turn, that God is ultimately the source of all good, and that rather than just being a rampant materialist and saying, okay, I'm in poverty, let me see what I can do to get out of poverty, but think in a very materialistic way. Everything from, oh, let me work 3 jobs to, even becoming a criminal. I'm in poverty. Well, what does that mean? Let me go out and start robbing from people and getting money in that way. So rather than these very materialistic ways of trying to alleviate poverty, you have to give credit to the person who has material needs, but they understand, but God is the source of everything. Let me turn to God. So yes, it's not a very high motivation for engaging in spirituality, but it is better than the alternative. And you still have to give that person credit that even if what they're seeking is some sort of immediate material relief, at least they know, well, let me turn to God for that. And this is the thing that is the hope, is that this individual, yes, maybe at first approaching for material reasons, that individual now turning to God to alleviate that material suffering, maybe as a result of that encounter with God, they will go deeper. See, that's always the hope of the sage when they're teaching someone or trying to guide someone who's materialistic. In the past, I've guided people, who are materialistic. I've known billionaires, I've known, wealthy people. And even in guiding people who are somewhat materially motivated, it's always the hope that, well, but I'm helping this person by turning them toward God. And hopefully, in time, this will change them within in such a way that now they will approach God for purer reasons. You see? So at least that person is on the path. It may not be that they have the firmest grasp of the path, but they're on the path. And that's what's important.
Right. They've at least put a foot onto it, and it's always the first step that's the most important. Um, so Krishna says that great souls like the sage are very rare. And many people on a spiritual path are seeking that kind of union with God where they are situated in wisdom, the way Krishna describes. But it sounds like, very few achieve it. Again, we're sort of back to where we started at the beginning of this stream. Like, if you have this statistically very small chance of reaching that, why bother? Some people might say. And in the last stream I did on the Gita, we had talked about how you sort of get like credit for spiritual achievement in one lifetime that carries over to the next. But it sounds like even with that, many people still won't attain this, despite, the credits they carry over from lifetime to lifetime.
Sure. Let me tell people the end of the movie and give away the greatest secret. Ultimately, everyone comes to know God. Even if it takes a million lifetimes, ultimately everyone eventually comes to know God, because this is why we are here. This is why we are created. This is our raison d'être. This is our reason for being, ultimately, is to know and to serve God. That being the case, of course, some people, being an illusion in the material world, some people will know God in one lifetime. Some people it will be three. Some people, yes, it will be thousands of lifetimes. So that's the first thing to understand. The other thing to understand is that most of us don't know exactly where we are on that journey. So this is why we must never become black-pilled and become pessimistic and give up and say to ourselves, well, it might take me forever to know God. Forever is not even the blink of an eye within the context of eternity. Forever doesn't even exist forever in the material sense. That being the case, throw yourself into the path now. Throw yourself into true spirituality now. Do everything that you can to know God now, because you don't know how many lifetimes you've been on this path. And it may be that this is your very last lifetime here, even though it may not even seem that way because you've been through suffering. This may be your last lifetime. And this is why, indeed, not knowing this, we should indeed throw ourselves into the path and more. This is a higher concept that I'm about to talk about. This is what it means to be truly devoted to God in the highest and absolutely selflessly. You surrender yourself unto God, not for your own sake, but for the sake of surrendering unto God. So in other words, this is a very high aspiration and concept that I'm talking about. Most people, even people who are seriously spiritual, still have this little bit of a problem where their idea of why am I practicing spirituality, it is still tinged with a little bit of self-interest, selfishness. What am I getting out of this? I want liberation. I want to be free from illusion, rather than understanding that when we can come to the point where in absolute sincerity and humility and with absolute devotion, we have the ability to surrender our very self at the feet of God with love, it is at that point that in actuality within we have embraced liberation. Because that's the goal of liberation, is the opposite of selfishness. So how can we assure that we are making progress, serious progress on the spiritual path, and that we're doing the right thing? Don't worry about how long it's going to take you. Don't worry about any trivial matters like this. Rather understand that the very process of surrendering at the feet of God is in itself its own reward. And once we fully understand that and have that insight, we're liberated. That is liberation.
I appreciate you telling us the end of the movie, because I'm one of those people who won't go see a movie or read a book unless I know how it ends first. I'm like, well, if it's not going to be a good ending, I don't want to waste my time. So now I know the ending to this movie and I can continue to participate in my lifetime. Okay, be serious now, Kat. And Krishna, Krishna is saying that people worship the lesser deities, or the celestial gods, because they're seeking material gains. And I'm sure there are many people who do worship the lesser deities, by which I mean, of course, anything other than the supreme Godhead, and those people might disagree with that. But Krishna is, of course, saying he's the source of all things, which would include the lesser deities. He's the source of them as well. And so he's also saying that for those who are devoted to one of these lesser deities, Krishna will still grant that person faith as well as their desires. So could you clarify here, what exactly is the proper role for the relationship between a person and a lesser deity? Because in the following section, he goes on to say, Well, in my translation, it's in verse 23, they will go to the gods they worship, but my worshipers come to me. In another translation, I think it makes it a little more clear, saying those people who worship other gods go to the celestial abodes of those gods. So I guess that's sort of the same thing. So I guess it's sort of a two-part question in the sense of, what is that the proper role for the relationship between the person and their chosen deity? And then, maybe could you say a little bit about these abodes of the lesser deities, and what is the fate of the souls who end up there as the result of worshiping them?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I'll try to answer this very systematically and a little bit in depth, because it's something that is indeed a very, very important topic, because we know that all pre-Abrahamic religions believed in both polytheism and monotheism. You see traces of both in all of the ancient religions, where even Vedic religion. I'm a follower of Vedic religion, and we have millions of gods and goddesses. But on the other hand, of course, this whole time we've been talking about God. So it is both polytheism and monotheism. So let me explain exactly how this works and what Krishna is speaking about. So indeed, there are a multiplicity of gods and goddesses. They're known in Sanskrit as devas and devis, respectively, gods and goddesses. And what these beings are is a myriad of various strata of much higher beings, higher than humans. And again, there are various strata of them. So they're not all equal. They're not all the same. Some are more powerful than others. Some are so powerful that some gods consider those to be their gods, So there's a wide-ranging hierarchy of divine beings who are there. And some of them, the lower ones, the less significant ones, will live for 20,000, 30,000 years. Some will live for hundreds of thousands. Some will live for millions. You have Brahma, who is the highest. He lives for literally billions and billions of years. So again, there are many of these beings, and they're both gods and goddesses. So indeed, we believe in all of these beings. We believe that they are beneficent. In other words, that they are worthy of worship, that they're worthy of appealing to, that indeed we should, whenever we can, take shelter of the gods, respect the gods, follow the way of the gods, etc. Devayana is one of the alternative names for Vedic spirituality, the way of the gods, etc. So indeed, we respect the gods. But on the one hand, on the other hand, we also understand what is the actual nature of these gods. As Krishna explains, and as is understood in Vedic spirituality very clearly, these are lesser beings. These are lesser gods. In other words, they're higher than humans, but they're not God. They're not quite literally eternal. They are not the source of all reality, both spiritual and material, conceptual and perceptual, but rather these are beings who, why are they gods? Well, first of all, where the gods dwell, indeed, these celestial dwellings, what in Sanskrit is called Svarga, or the heavenly abode of the gods, that is situated within the material world. So if you can envision, just envision a round circle, and that represents our universe. So these are the beings who inhabit the upper echelons, not so much just geographically, but ontologically. They are finer beings, purer beings, subtler beings, etc. And despite that being the case, they are existing within the material world. In other words, they also are reincarnating. Why are they gods? Why is it that such and such person is this god who is going to live for 50,000 years, has these powers, these attributes, etc.? It's because they had extremely good karma, and that's how they became reincarnated. For that matter, why are there animals? Why are there so many lesser beings? The opposite. Those are people who had bad karma. They went downward. So this is who the gods are. They are people who had such wonderful karma and even spiritual merit, to the point where now, yes, this is a god who lives for 10 million years and has this tremendous responsibility, etc. So we honor them. But at the same time, we understand that, yes, they are not the ultimate. Rather, it's explained in the Vedic scriptures. Yes, Krishna speaks about this. Even the gods themselves, in many places in the Vedic scriptures, talk about this. They are servants of the Supreme Absolute. They are service of, to use Plotinus, of the One. And this is how they see themselves, and this is how God sees them, and this is how we are to see them. Now, this being, of course, the Kali Yuga, everyone is confused about everything, including spirituality and religion and philosophy and hierarchy, etc. All of these extremely important topics. That being the case, people have a muddled understanding as far as who these gods are. So, thus, there is this worthless debate about polytheism versus monotheism. We know, I love Asatru, for example. I love pre-Christian European religion. I work very closely with many, many leaders of pre-Christian European religions. But we know that there's been this worthless debate about polytheism versus monotheism. That is, many Asatru people, in their attempt to reject Christianity, interestingly, accepting what historically Christians said about them, that is, you're polytheists, and they've embraced that. you know, and it's not a matter of one or the other. It's not a matter of monotheists versus polytheists, but rather both. We respect the gods, we honor the gods, we worship the gods, we understand their much higher nature than us, but at the same time, we have to understand what the gods say about themselves. And in the Vedic scriptures, in the Srimad Bhagavatam, in the Upanishads, in many places, especially the Puranas, the gods themselves, both individually and collectively, make it very clear we are servants of that one. So if we are worshiping the gods, take what the gods are saying seriously. And they are saying we worship the one. And now here in the Bhagavad Gita, with Krishna speaking, what do we have? And again, I'm using this nice Plotinus term because I love Plotinus. Here you have the one saying that indeed the gods are subservient to me. That is, Krishna is the one. He is the incarnation, at least, of Narayana, of the Supreme Absolute. And he is saying, indeed, even when you have devotion and faith to any specific god or goddess, understand, I am the one who is supplying you even with your own faith in that god or goddess. It's a profound statement. It's a truly profound statement that he is saying, that even your own faith, that power of your faith, is something that you must thank me for. So indeed, he is the one. He is the ultimate. He is Parabrahman. He is the absolute.
Right. And I think a lot of times some people kind of get hung up on this dichotomy of like monotheism versus polytheism. And this is sort of putting it in like a proper hierarchy where it's like, yes, there is this one supreme God that still leaves room for these other deities. And it's almost kind of like, in worshiping these lesser deities, you're almost kind of like getting some practice for, maybe a future lifetime where you can worship Krishna.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and this is the thing. This gets back to the idea of even the materialist person turning to God for their material needs. Even if you are worshiping a God who is a good being, but not the supreme God, indeed, at least mentally, you're in that mode where you are trying to be pious, you are being spiritual. What are you doing ultimately psychologically from a spiritual perspective? You are putting other before yourself. You see, this is why worship is universal in all ancient religions. This is why worship is universal, and this is why it's of such importance. This is why devotion is of such importance. Because from a yogic psychology perspective, what you're doing is you are militating against ego. See, what does ego tell us? Ego says, put me in the center, me, worship myself. Literally, people, they won't say that consciously because it makes them sound like monsters. But people, if they're egotistical, they're worshiping themselves. Now, what does it mean to worship a truly higher being, whether it's God, whether it's a divine god or goddess? You are now doing the opposite of that motion spiritually. You're saying, no, a higher being, I am putting this higher being in the center, not just myself, not just this false idea of myself. Rather, I'm putting something higher in the center of my concern. And that is always a good thing. Like you said, that is practice. It's good and crucial practice for eventually coming to that point of self-surrender to God and ultimate liberation.
Yeah, which kind of brings us up to my next point, which is, Krishna says he knows everything but is beyond all knowing. um, so I mean, God can't really be analyzed with the intellect and approached merely through these cognitive processes. He has to be experienced, and at which point you don't need faith or reason anymore, because you have the experience that you just know in your heart and soul to be true. And then a few verses later, Krishna says that those who take refuge in him are basically blessed with his grace and allowed to know him. So it sounds like ultimately, regardless of whatever else you do, it is that total surrender to Krishna that is the key ingredient. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. Yes, definitely. And yeah, before I address that, let me address very quickly one thing that you just said, and that is the idea of trying to approach God through the intellect. Trying to approach God through the intellect without actual experience of God is kind of like a computer trying to understand love. It's an impossibility.
Yeah.
Now, can you program a computer to recite love lyrics, love sonnets? Absolutely. Does it actually understand love? It never will. It's an impossibility. In the same way, to take a, let me say, purely intellectual approach to knowing God. See that we have to have that caveat, because to be a serious spiritual person, oh, you have to be intelligent. There's no way around that. If you're not intelligent, you can't be spiritual. That may sound like a radical statement, but it's not. You have to be able to cultivate wisdom. You have to be able to understand philosophy, not in just the academic sense, but true philosophy, true wisdom, etc. But at the same time, to think that intellect alone can help us to know God, no, you'll never know God, just like that computer can never know love. The example that Prabhupada gave, and actually many gurus, Prabhupada is one of my gurus. But the example that's given is, imagine you've never tasted honey in your life. You've never tasted it. You've heard the word, and placed before you is this closed jar of honey. And you're looking at it and you're staring at it and you're trying to understand, okay, what does honey taste like? All right, let me stare. Oh, okay, it looks kind of golden brown, and you speculate and you speculate. You will never understand what the taste of honey is by staring empirically at that jar or intellectually trying to understand and analyze what you are seeing. Rather, you have to go there, you have to open the jar. Don't bother with a spoon. Stick your hand in there and taste it. Now you'll know what honey is. In the same way, to truly understand God, you can't use only intellect. You have to taste. You have to experience God.
You got to be like Winnie the Pooh and really get your head right down into that jar of honey.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You have to dive in, dive deep into reality. That's what my guru would say. That was one of his sayings. Dive deep into reality.
Yes. Um, so Krishna ends this chapter by saying that those who know him are always with him, even at the hour of their death. And so my understanding is that your mindset upon death is extremely important in determining the fate of the soul. Various traditions have their own spin on this idea, of course, but it does seem to be broadly the case that you really do need to keep your mind fixed on God when you pass, which may be very difficult to do, given that death is said to be painful or disorienting, or however it's described as, it's generally described as some kind of difficult condition that would be very difficult to just keep your mind focused on this single pointed idea. But he says, enlightened souls are able to do this nonetheless. So could you speak a little bit about this?
Definitely. Yes, it is difficult. A lot of people think that they know what the nature and the experience of death is, but you really don't until you experience it. And for the average person, it's terrifying. It's a truly terrifying thing to go through death, because what does it mean? It means that you are quite literally exchanging worlds. You're exchanging everything that you have known of perceptually and conceptually all of your life, and within a split second, that reality is gone, and you're in a radically different reality. That can be traumatizing, very scary for people. But at the same time, it is indeed true that Krishna says this actually a few times in Bhagavad Gita. It's also explained in other Vedic scriptures as well, that if at the time of death you can focus completely upon God, you will be with God. For that matter, let's take a step back, actually. whatever you are focusing on, and when I say focusing, I mean in every sense. This means what is of true importance to you at the time of death. Because at the time of death, what is of true importance to you subconsciously comes to the fore. You see, that's the power of what Krishna is speaking about. Oh, you can pretend all your life, let's say, oh yes, I was a spiritual person all my life, but in actuality, you were really addicted to pornography, and that's in your subconscious. Now, at the time of death, what are you going to think of at the time of death? Better hope that you think of God. You may not. You may think of something else. So this is the important point, is that indeed what you are focusing on at the point of death, that is what will then carry you to your next existence. This is true for reincarnation. This is also true for liberation. Now, dealing very specifically with what you are asking about, and that is liberation. If an individual has the ability at the time of death, as all this trauma is occurring, if they have the ability with awareness, with one pointed concentration, to focus upon God as they're doing that transition, indeed they will be with God. Now, why is this the case? You see, I've had a few people ask me this and say, well, so then a person can just be a radical materialist all their life, but then at the time of death, they focus on Krishna and they'll be liberated, right? Is that what this is saying? No. If you are a radical materialist at the time of death, trust me, you will not have the ability to think about God. The very fact that you have that ability to focus on God at the time of death doesn't come about just by accident. It meant that you cultivated that for all of your life. It meant indeed that you are a spiritual person, that you did daily meditation, that you did puja, that you did ritual in which you are offering things to God, that you were reading about God, you were thinking about God, you were immersed in God consciousness for much of your life, to even come to that point where at death, oh, you're focusing on God. So indeed, if a person can achieve that, it's not just that, oh, they were lucky, they happened to focus on God. No, this is why indeed we do what is called sadhana. This is why we do spiritual practice. So that at the time of death, indeed, because we have been spiritually practicing, meditating, focusing on God with devotion for much of our life, then at the time of death, to focus on God is easy. It's effortless. And that is the point. And indeed, you become like that upon which you meditate. You go to that which is in the forefront of your awareness at the time of death. And what is forefront in your awareness is what was truly of importance to you in that lifetime.
Yeah, that's I mean that's kind of my feeling too, just in terms of the various different traditions I've kind of studied. When I was making the Revolt episode on the two paths in the afterlife, I was looking into a number of different traditions and what they had to say about that. And, it does seem to be the case that, whatever your material cravings were, if you go into death with those, then that's what's going to be used to entice you back into another material life in some way or another. So, um, I remember going into surgery once and, you know, wanting to like just kind of keep my mind. It was just a routine surgery, nothing that risky, but you never know, right? And just kind of wanting to keep my mind fixed on God. And they were just talking to me about like, well, what do you do for a living kind of stuff. And I'm like, not really the conversation I want to be having right now. Can you just shush? um, okay. Well, so are you happy to take some questions from the chat?
Absolutely. It'd be my pleasure.
Okay, well, at the start of the show, we had some discussion about your dot. Can you explain your dot to people, please?
Yes, Hinduism for kindergartners. Yes, I will indeed explain this. Yes, the dot is something that is universally found throughout the ancient world. It's not something that's only Hindu. You find this in the Roman world. You find this in many, many different nations throughout the ancient world. You find it in China. You find it in ancient Japan, etc. And what the dot represents is several things. First of all, it is symbolic in that, in the same way that oh, there's someone wearing a cross. Oh, they must be Christian. Oh, there's someone with a yarmulke. They must be a Jew, etc., etc. Well, in the same way, this is symbolic of the fact that you are a follower of Dharma. But then more esoterically, the reason why we very specifically have this paste that consists of turmeric and several other natural substances is because it is meant to also stimulate what is called the third eye. In Sanskrit, Agya Chakra. Agya Chakra is what this is called. And what this is, people have heard of the chakra system. Unfortunately, like many Vedic concepts, of course, it's become very New Ageified. Now you have New Age people speculating endlessly and futilely about chakras. But the chakra system is something real. It's yogic, it's Vedic. And the idea is that there is indeed a very important energy center that is here in the forehead, which leads to wisdom and to insightful wisdom, very specifically. That's why it's also called the third eye. If you have the ability to awaken the Agya Chakra, you have the ability to see without seeing. You have very deep intuition. So that's why we wear the dot.
Hopefully that answers your question and clears up the debate in the chat. So Joe asks, the soul choosing physical life, can it be proved?
Can it be proved? Can you prove to me that you have a mind? See, whenever it comes to people asking me questions like this, I find questions about, can you prove God's existence? Can you prove that you actually have a soul? Can you prove that which necessarily is trans-empirical and trans-intellectual? It depends on what you mean by proof. That which is not empirical by its very essential being, that which is trans-intellectual by its very essential being, cannot be quote unquote proven by something that's below it. So this is the example that I always give people. I've given thousands of talks to audiences in the past, including at Hindu temples, many places for over 30 years. And once in a while, someone in the audience will ask me one of these questions. Oh, can you prove God exists? And my answer is, can you prove to me that you have a mind? And they don't. Sometimes they'll get it, sometimes they don't, and they'll say, well, of course I have a mind, otherwise I wouldn't be speaking to you. No, you still haven't proven to me that you have a mind. By proof, what I'm asking you for is the same sort of proof that you're asking me for, empirical proof. Can you show me your mind, and not show me that by implication you must have a mind because you are exhibiting the qualities of one who has a mind? No. What color is your mind? I want to see it. Show it to me. Show it to me. I want to see your mind. I want to see how much it weighs. I want to see its shape. I want to see its color. I want to see how it operates. And of course, then they get it. They understand that indeed, everyone has a mind. But interestingly, to actually quite literally empirically prove that we have one, other than by inference, we can't. So in the same way, what is a mind? A mind is something that is insignificant compared to trying to prove what is the nature of soul, what is the nature of, or the existence of God. So in other words, yes, we're using the wrong tools, and we're using the wrong very basis of asking the question to begin with. It's kind of like understanding, okay, God is a non-physical being. I want to touch God. Well, right there alone, you understand the impossibility of using an inadequate tool to prove the existence of something that is infinitely greater than that inadequate tool. Rather, how do we know these things? Experience. Again, experience. It's again like the example of the closed jar of honey. You can stare at it all you want. You'll never understand it. Open it and taste it. Then you'll understand. In the same way, how do we prove soul, God, Dharma, anything metaphysical? You experience it. Otherwise, if you have this idea that, and this is the last thing I'll say about this, I'm old enough, I remember, when the first cosmonauts of the Soviet Union went into space, and of course they were atheists. This was a communist, Marxist, Leninist, atheistic, demonic regime. When the first cosmonauts went into space, knowing that they had to toe the party line, the people on the ground asked them, all right, our brave cosmonauts, you're now there in space. Let us know, do you see God anywhere? Ha, ha, ha. And of course, the cosmonauts, following the party line, no, we don't see any God around here. Ha, ha, ha. How childlike to think that God quite literally is just a big man in the sky. And if you shoot a rocket up, you'll eventually see him. It's not possible to know that which is trans-empirical by using empirical means.
Yes. Well, hopefully that answers your question, Joe. I'm just scrolling through here looking for some more. We got a donation from Frank, who's a big supporter of the channel. So thank you, Frank. And also another from Simon. Thank you to both of you. We really appreciate that. I know there are more questions here. Just browsing through them. A lot of lively discussion. That's always nice to see. I like to see an active chat because it means that people are thinking about things and debating and trying to come to some understanding. All right. I assume here he's referring to like the lesser deities. Are they called gods for lack of words, or what? Why they couldn't be called something else? Yeah, I mean, I would agree that that can be a little bit confusing. And maybe, you know, well, I think they're specific. They do have a specific name in Sanskrit, don't they?
Yes. Yeah. In English, it is indeed confusing. So, for example, even I'm seeing the question here, even in the question, I see that he's capitalized the G of gods. Yeah. In English, it's confusing. In Sanskrit, it's made quite clear. The lesser gods and goddesses generally are known in a general category as Deva for gods and Devi for goddesses. Translated into English, of course, it does indeed become a problem because, like with so many concepts in English, you know, like love, for example, you know, what is it? The ancient Greeks, I believe, had seven different words for all the intricacies of the different kinds of love, whereas in English, we have one love, one word, love. You know, I love my cat, I love my dog, I love my mother, I love God, I love ice cream, I love, etc. And it all is one word. Well, in the same way, as far as why this term is translated into English as gods, yes, it's for lack of words. That's why better to just use the Sanskrit, Deva, Devi, or just generally you could say the Devas, the gods.
Yeah, and I think, yeah, in other languages, maybe it's a little bit more clear. Jonathan asks if you believe in objective morality.
In objective morality.
And there's a second to his question as well. So more than one person wants to know. It better be a good answer.
Yes.
Yes, you do. Okay. Do you? All right. Nick asked, nice to see you here again, Nick. You're always here in my streams. How does one draw near to Krishna after having been so deceived by other deities and religions? And just to put this in some context, I did see an earlier comment from Nick about how he didn't feel the Abrahamic God was worthy of his devotion or worship. So I assume that that's the context of this question.
Very good. And Philosophicat, knowing you and knowing your work, you are dedicated to truth. So I'll give the actual truthful answer to this, but I'll state it as nicely as I can. Indeed, the God of Abrahamism is not the supreme being, is not the God that is spoken of in the Vedic tradition or by the ancients in any way whatsoever. That's something that I believe and teach. It's something that other, let's say, authentic gurus within the Vedic tradition also teach. David Frawley, for example, Vamadeva Shastri is a very good friend of mine. He and I had discussions about this 25 years ago. Indeed, the God of Abrahamism is a very, very recent and very different being from the being who is spoken of by Plato, by Plotinus, by Socrates, by even Aristotle, by certainly all the Vedic rishis, etc. So any of the traditions, the ancient pre-Christian, pre-Abrahamic traditions that speak of God, the God of Abrahamism is indeed a very, very different being. He's not the supreme absolute. And that being the case, it's very sad if Nick, if you found yourself discouraged by having worshipped the God of Abrahamism and found it to be ultimately distasteful. I'm very, very sorry that that was your experience. However, God, in who God truly is real. And please do not give up. Indeed, if you want to know what is God, God is not a God who demands that we fear him. On the contrary, what is Krishna's ultimate teaching in Bhagavad Gita? In chapter 18, verse 66, he says, Ma shuchaha, He says, do not fear. He says the opposite. The true God of reality, i.e., the supreme absolute, that in which nothing greater can be conceived, is not a God who calls upon us to be his slave, who does not call upon us to fear him, etc. Rather, God is a God of love. The true God is a God of love, who loves us, and who wishes us to, in time when we are ready, of our own free will, to reciprocate that love. And that is who God is. So indeed, how do you draw near to Krishna after being so deceived? Let me answer that if I can. I'm sorry to take a little time with this, but it's an important, heartfelt question.
It's a good question, and I know Nick really is serious about this question. So do take your
I
time.
like heartfelt, down to earth questions, not just deeply philosophical. This is what I would say to you, Nick, is in the same way that how do we grow spiritually? There's a two-tier process. We rid ourselves of anything negative, anything bad, anything evil that we find within ourselves. And then B, we cultivate the good within ourselves. In the same way, the way that you do precisely what you're asking here is, little by little, divorce yourself internally, exorcise yourself in a way, as almost in an exorcism, exorcise yourself of this lower concept that was there, that you learned in Abrahamism. Indeed, that God is supremely judgmental and hateful and fearful, etc. Slowly rid yourself of that negatively, but then positively learn from the Vedic scriptures, learn from the teachings of true gurus, etc., the truly beautiful and sweet and loving nature of what God truly is, and fully embrace that within yourself. And it will come to the point where you will be spiritually healed, and you will come to the point where you will embrace God as what God truly is. And that is a love that is insurpassable.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Mr. Odenswolf, and he asks, if one does not die consciously remembering Krishna, will Krishna remember us?
Good question. Interesting. Very interesting question, actually. Let me say, first of all, there is never a time, actually, when Krishna does not remember us. There is never a time when we are not in God's awareness. This is the nature of God, God being not just omniscient, but again, also all loving. God is always aware of each and every soul in existence at all times, and without hesitation, without stopping. It's an amazing thing to even think of, that every living being, that is every Atman, every soul in existence, whether in human form, whether reincarnated in animal form, or as gods or whoever, God is aware of every living being and is loving them. So indeed, God is always remembering us. So that's not the problem. God knows us. The problem is that we have forgotten God. And indeed, this is a very nice analogy. If I can just take a minute to talk about this. This is a very nice example of the predicament that we find ourselves in. We are suffering from spiritual amnesia. It's like the usual story that sometimes you see in movies, that you hear about. Oh, a person gets hit on the head. And let's say, they're a pretty powerful person, or it can be a prince or princess or somebody. And they find themselves somewhere where no one knows them. They get hit on the head and they forget everything. Well, this is our problem. We have forgotten. Now, the thing is, our forgetfulness is self-imposed. That's the difference. No one hit us on the head. It's like we hit ourselves on the head. And we embraced ego. We embraced illusion. We embraced what we thought was the opposite of God, because we're in illusion. We wanted to exercise ego instead of love. That being the case, right now we are in a state of amnesia. We don't remember who we are. Well, what is our goal in life? Our goal in life is indeed to remember fully who we are and to embrace that true identity. How do we do that? Well, a person who has amnesia, what do? You introduce them to things that they should know, and you try to jog their memory. And it might take years. But you say, oh, this is your mother. Yeah, meet your mother. Here are the favorite things that you loved. Here is this, here is that. That process, spiritually speaking, that's sadhana. That is spiritual practice. When we're doing spiritual practice, what we're doing is we are refining our spiritual memory in such a way that we remember who we are and that God is our source and that God is ever present with us. So that's the problem, is not so much that God doesn't remember us, he does, but we have chosen to not remember him.
Thank you. So I've got a two-part question here from somebody who's made a name that I don't know how to say and making me look silly on my own channel. I think I know who this is too. He says, Krishna speaks of being the sage Kapila who put forth the idea of Kaivalya, I'm sure I'm not saying these right, which seems similar to concepts espoused in Buddhism, namely solitude or non-union with God. These seem to be departures from surrender to God. Would this be an example of the alternative and ultimately incorrect path of self you spoke on earlier?
Okay, now Philosophicat, I apologize deeply. I was reading his name in Sanskrit, so you may have to repeat the first part again. Let me just say
There's the
first,
first part.
Savitur Vrika, I believe is the name in Sanskrit. But I'm sorry, I was translating that in my mind.
It's okay.
Repeat the
So
past.
here's the first part again. So Krishna speaks of being the sage Kapila who put forth the idea of Kaivalya, which seems similar to concepts espoused in Buddhism, namely solitude or non-union with God. These seem to be departures from surrender to God, which is an example of the alternative and ultimately incorrect path of self you spoke on earlier.
Hmm. Excellent, very good historical question, very good philosophical question, and I will answer it. So indeed, Krishna indeed is Kapila. In fact, for that matter, Kapila is considered to be an Avesha avatar. He is someone who is a direct representative of God. At the same time, Kapila is indeed known to be the quote unquote founder of the Sankhya school of the Shad Darshanas, of the six schools of Vedic philosophy. This is what this individual is referring to. And the Sankhya school today, unfortunately, is incorrectly, let's say, interpreted to be an atheistic school. Now, this is something I've spoken about extensively, not in any video that's available online because we felt it was a little too deep philosophically, but I've spoken about this. I've written about this a little bit, not very much. So let me give the explanation of this. Indeed, Kapila is the founder of the Sankhya school. However, when it comes to the Sankhya school is not atheistic. That is not true. That is a lie. Let me explain how this misconception of Sankhya came about. First of all, the actual writings of Kapila, known as the Sankhya Sutra, is no longer extant. We no longer have it. So we don't know what Kapila actually says in his primary philosophical work known as the Sankhya Sutra. That's gone. Rather, what we have as the earliest extant writing is the Sankhya Karika. This is a secondary work that was written by someone else way after Kapila was here. That is kind of a summation of what Kapila taught. This is the first thing to understand. The second thing to understand is that nowhere, even in the Sankhya Karika, which I've read certainly in English and partially in Sanskrit as well, so I know this work quite well. I even have known some of the world's leading authorities academically, at least on Sankhya. Nowhere in the Sankhya Karika does it overtly state that this is an atheistic philosophy, God does not exist. Rather, like as is true for all of what are called the Shad Darshanas, that is the six schools of Vedic philosophy. Each of these six schools, and speaking of Atmans in cat bodies,
He just wanted to give us hello.
Namaste, Oslo. Very good to see you.
You remember Acharya Ji. Go on now.
I'm so glad that you like my videos, Oslo. It's very nice to hear. You were telling me when my videos are on, he stares at the.
I think I sent you a picture of him doing it once.
Very nice.
Sorry to interrupt.
No, that's all right. I'm not. was not thrown off base. Speaking of this, the Shaddarshanas, that is the 6 schools of Vedic philosophy, each of them of necessity, the reason why there are 6 schools, they all have their specific areas of concern. Now, because they have a specific area of concern and thus they address that concern and they don't address other concerns, that does not in and of itself mean that they are rejecting those other concerns. So I'll give you an example. One of the 6 schools is Nyaya. Nyaya is the school of logic. It is the school of epistemology. It is a school of, indeed, proofs for the existence of God, etc., etc. Now, there are very important aspects of Vedic philosophy that are not spoken about in Nyaya. Does that mean that they reject them? Absolutely not. That school focuses on logic. And you have Vaisheshika that focuses on cosmology and physics, etc., etc. Well, in the same way, the Sankhya school traditionally focuses on very specifically this bifurcation, this duality, this idea of Purusha and Prakriti, that is consciousness, very generally speaking, as a general category of ontological being, versus Prakriti, versus materiality. That is its area of concern, not speaking about God and not speaking about anything else. That being the case, because God is not spoken of in the, let's say, oldest extant texts of the Sankhya school, some modern scholars have thus claimed that, oh, it is an atheistic school. Well, if you have person A over here, and he is a doctor, he's an MD, and thus all that he tends to talk about is medicine, can you thus conclude that he does not believe in God? You can't. Now, unless you ask him, oh, by the way, in addition to speaking about medicine 90% of your time, do you believe in God? Oh, sure I do. There you go. There's the answer. Well, in the same way, there is zero proof positive that Kapila or the Sankhya school or the Sankhya Karika or any of the earliest extant texts reject God. There's no evidence of that. On the contrary, what we see is we see the actual teachings of Kapila in several places, certainly in the Srimad Bhagavatam, but other Puranas as well, not just the Srimad Bhagavatam, where Kapila is teaching, and indeed he speaks about the nature of God. So thus, indeed, Kaivalya is one of the very technical alternative words that is used for liberation, that indeed is used not only in Sankhya, but in its sister school, Yoga, as well. So thus, you even have Patanjali, who uses this word, Kaivalya, meaning liberation. But Patanjali, within the Yoga Sutras, talks about God extensively. Indeed, 2 weeks ago, I gave a lecture that is on our channel, the Dharma Nation channel, called The God of Patanjali. So simply because they use the word Kaivalya doesn't mean they don't believe in God. Indeed, Patanjali and the Yoga Sutras is proof of that.
All right, thank you. So, I've just mentioned in the chat, just due to the volume of questions compared to the amount of time we have, I'll prioritize super chats that will be donated to the ISDS and personal questions regarding like your own personal spiritual journey ahead of the theological questions, just because I want to make sure that if anybody's having, some questions about their own practice, that they're able to get them answered tonight. So we have a question from Chad, who sends $5. Thank you, Chad. In the Ramayana, it says that the Devas grew jealous of Vishwamitra's spiritual advancement. What are the implications of this in regards to our own? That's interesting.
Very good question. And indeed, this covers several things that we were talking about previously, including the fact that indeed, the devas, the gods, as we were saying, they are not truly, absolutely perfected beings. Rather, these are Atmans or souls who are in the material world, and they accumulated a lot of good karma. So thus, they find themselves reincarnated in this very high position of being a god. But they're still imperfect. They're still in illusion, interestingly. Most of the gods are still in illusion. This being the case, the fact that indeed the Devas became jealous of Vishwamitra is not surprising. Indeed, the gods will sometimes display somewhat petty emotions. And the reason why is because again, they are living beings who are in illusion. They are much greater than us in so many ways, in their wisdom, in their abilities, in their powers, in their goodness, in their purity. But these are beings who, for the most part, have not achieved liberation yet. They are still struggling with their own problems, their own internal, let's say, ethical, moral problems, their own internal emotional problems, anger and jealousy, et cetera, et cetera. So that's what this shows. As far as what are the implications of this in regards to ourselves, indeed, that we are to transcend jealousy. And whether we're human, whether we are a god, that we are to transcend jealousy, we are to transcend envy, we are to transcend anger and hatred and lust and all of these baser sorts of motivators that are there within us. And if we see that even some of the gods are experiencing these difficulties, then what to speak of us? We have to indeed endeavor to become very, very pure if we are to know God.
Thank you. And as always, just excuse the cat.
Does Oslo concur?
Do you concur? What do you think? I bet if you could talk, you'd tell us a lot of things you've uncovered in your meditations. We've got another $5 sent in from Ananda who asks if you could teach me how to properly pronounce Julius Evelyn's name.
Not publicly, no. Not
I'm
publicly.
saying it right. I have proof. I posted it to Telegram if you don't believe me. All right, there was a good question here that I'm just trying to find it again. Same person asks, what is the purpose of Kamadeva seducing sages in the past in order to make them fall? Why does God intentionally try to make people fall down?
Very good. Very good. This is a very deep, complicated question that, again, I'll try to answer as succinctly as I can. First of all, there are indeed very interesting stories like this. They fall under a very specific literary category known as Lila, where what is in actuality happening is that it's God quite literally playing, God having fun. That's the first thing. Second thing is, if let me state this as down to earth as I can. What does it mean to be a sage if you can be so easily thrown off the path? Very often, what God is trying to do is trying to show comeuppance to sages who are kind of full of themselves and think that they're a lot more advanced than they really are. So sometimes God Himself will teach people a lesson by kind of saying, "Oh yes, so you think you're a really advanced, liberated sage here to save the world and teach the world everything? All right, let's test you." And of course, they often fail the test. So in a way, seen in this way, it's actually God's mercy upon them. Because imagine that you are indeed someone who you claim to be very spiritual, and maybe you even are a serious practitioner, but you're kind of full of yourself. You know, you kind of have the spiritual ego. What a blessing would it be for God Himself to come to us and give us a test to show us how, yeah, we're kind of full of ourselves and to bring us back to the true path. So,
You almost have to see it as a gift, don't you?
yes, exactly. It is a gift from God that He's placing these people back on the true path and showing them, hey, don't think you're so great spiritually. Not yet. You're not there yet.
Yeah, well, there's another great question here that I found from 108 Rudy. How do you distinguish between illusions of God and real experience of God? I think that's a great question.
It is indeed a great question, actually. This is an epistemological question. This is a question of how do you know? How do you know
Yeah.
something? And very specifically in this case, when it comes to something that is radically subjective, quote unquote, spiritually and psychologically. So indeed, it is the case. And yeah, I'll go into this a little bit in depth because it is a good question. You have people all the time, indeed, not to belabor the point, but I will because it has to be belabored. New agey people will have quote unquote experiences all the time. I've met so many, I've been cursed with having to have met so many hundreds of such people who they'll have some sort of experience once in a while, not even having ingested drugs. Actually, they'll have some sort of quote unquote experience, and they'll just run with it, and they're convinced that it's true. Oh, I'm convinced that, oh, I was deep in quote unquote meditation and I had this vision of a bagel. So the bagel somehow is representative of the cosmic blood. And they'll just go on and on droning like a fool. And now this is the question. How do you know? Indeed, how do you know that that isn't real? Maybe it is God. Maybe God's a bagel. Maybe, or maybe not. How do you know? Well, this is, again, an epistemological question. And let me go a little bit in depth about this, because I wrote a book about this uh, called The Vedic Way of Knowing God. It's a 450-page book. It was my PhD dissertation. The way that we indeed know what is real experience is that, first of all, being in experience, we need to derive knowledge of that experience from sources that are necessarily outside of ourselves. Now, let me explain this in a way that people can relate to. You have never picked up a biology book in your life. You're barely even aware of what a cell is in the human body. And yet, all right, I want to now study medicine. And again, my goal is to become a brain surgeon, like the example I gave before. Well, now what are you to do? Now that you wish to acquire this knowledge and experience, are you going to acquire this on your own? That's going to be almost impossible. Actually, it will be impossible to learn everything that you need to learn about biology, about medicine, and then the intricacies of what it actually looks like and means to actually do surgery on one of the most delicate organs of the human body, the human brain, etc. You're not going to become a brain surgeon just picking up a few books and teaching yourself, experimenting on little animals that you find along the way and killing all of them. No, you're not going to be a brain surgeon. Rather, what do? You derive that experience from external sources, i.e., those individuals who themselves have had that experience and have learned that experience in an authentic manner, i.e., you go to medical school. This is why you go to medical school if you want to be a brain surgeon. You don't just pick up some biology books from half-price books and teach yourself to open someone's head and play with their brain. So you go to an expert. In the same way, spiritually speaking, how do you distinguish between illusions of God versus real experience of God? You speak to those individuals who themselves have had real experience of God. And you have those individuals train you to distinguish the difference between one versus the other. And let me tell you, this is not a lesson that's going to be a 6-week course. This is something that will take some time, a lot of effort, a lot of intelligence on your part, a lot of patience on your part. And again, training with what we call a guru. That is an individual who has experienced God. In time, that person will give you all of the knowledge, the wisdom, the what is called pramana, that is the epistemologically derived valid means of knowing that are there in Vedic spirituality, such that you can distinguish that which is reality versus that which is illusion, etc. And this is all a very intricate subject, but it can be taught to you. To cut to the chase, you need a true and authentic and enlightened guru to help you to know this and to make that distinction.
Okay. So I've got another question here. I'm going to be brave and put another one up on the screen that's filled with words I can't pronounce, from Berserker. And the context of his question, he says he's asking because Odin, as well as several other earthly nature spirits, are very dear to him. He asks, while one is devoted wholly to Sriman Narayana, can one also give love and devotion to a demigod like... I'm not even going to try to say that. You guys.
like X person gave toward Thor. Okay, I'm not good with Nordic spellings either. But yes, but I understand the question absolutely. I will answer the question, but first let me answer the question by asking a question. Can one be devoted wholly to Sriman Narayana? And for those in your audience who don't know, Sriman Narayana is the highest name of the Supreme Being. It is the personal name of the Supreme Being in Sanatana Dharma. So while one is devoted to Sriman Narayana, can one also give love and devotion to one's wife, to one's husband, The answer, of course, is yes. The answer, of course, is that this is not a divided love, but in actuality, you can love the Supreme Being with all of your being. And at the same time, you can also have love and devotion toward others. You can have love and devotion toward your children. Indeed, you should have love and devotion toward your wife if you are a man, toward your husband if you are a woman. You should have love and devotion toward your children. You should have love and devotion toward your nation, toward your people, etc. And there is no matter of division. You can love God, but indeed, what does it mean to love God if that love for God doesn't also overflow into love for all good beings? So to answer your question now, is it possible to have love and devotion toward Thor? And that is who I believe. Again, I'm not good with Nordic spellings, but I believe that's what this is saying. So let's say toward a lesser god or goddess. Yes, indeed, you can. You can. And it's not a divided love. Indeed, it's an overflowing of your love toward God. That indeed, if you love God, you're going to love others as well. If you love God, you're going to love your family, your nation, your people. You're going to love your cat. You're going to love your pets. You're going to love your cow, etc., etc. So indeed, you can have love and devotion toward the gods and goddesses in addition to God.
All right, thank you. I had somebody's question and I've just lost it, so I apologize to that person. I'm going to have to go back and find it. All right, we've got, just checking to see if there's any like more personal questions before I start choosing the theological ones. Oh, I like this one from our Sanskrit friend again, who also sent us a thank you for the previous question you answered from him. As Kalki is a ways off, what can the Kshatriyas of the world look for in the interim with regards to holding the line until then? Will divine appointed leadership emerge before then to rally behind?
Very good. As far as true Kshatriyas, this is what you are to do, is that in the name of Dharma, you must be like steel, and you must not give in to evil. This is what you are to do. But now, dealing with very, very specifically, given the fact that Kalki is a ways off, let's talk about that first. Indeed, because I must assume that not everyone, Philosophica, and your audience always knows all these terms. Kalki is indeed the next avatar to come. He is the next avatar of Vishnu, of Narayana. He is going to be here in over 400,000 years. Indeed, this Kali Yuga, this is another thing that there's unfortunate confusion about, that there wasn't up until about 150 years ago. The Kali Yuga lasts for 432,000 years. And thus far, just a little bit over 5,000 years, about 5,200 years has gone by. So the bulk of the Kali Yuga is ahead of us. So that's the first thing to understand. But then indeed, Kalki comes. He's the next avatar to come. And he reestablishes the golden age, the true golden age, the Satya Yuga. He does this indeed in a martial way. He does this by raising an army of the devotees who are left upon the earth, and they quite literally wage a war of annihilation against the psychopaths. And indeed, the next golden age begins. So this is what he's speaking of. So now, what can the Kshatriyas of the world look for in the interim with regard to holding the line until then? Yes, several things that I will say about this. First of all, Kshatriya is a warrior. It's a Dharma warrior. And if you are indeed an individual who you find yourself to be a Kshatriya, number one, the first thing that you have to do is to cultivate what that means in yourself. Explore what that means fully as far as virtue, as far as excellence, as far as nobility, and then finally as far as the martial aspect. You see, what it means to be a Kshatriya, what it means to be a true warrior, is that first and foremost, you develop nobility. This is where we get the word Arya from. Arya means nobility. And this is the element that is missing, sadly, in many individuals who today are what I have called broken Kshatriyas. That is, they have that martial spirit. They see themselves as a warrior, but often they don't couple that with nobility. No, first and foremost, a warrior is an individual who cultivates in themselves virtue, nobility, dharma. That is, if you're going to fight, make sure above all things that you fight for the good. That you fight for the good, and that you fight in a detached sort of way. That you fight not out of hatred, but that you fight out of love for your people, out of love for this world, out of love for Dharma, etc. Now, having cultivated the internal aspects of what it means to be a warrior within yourself, what it means to apply yourself in the world within the context of the Kali Yuga is, oh no, not that you're a violent person, not that you do any kind of crazy illegal things or anything like this, but rather Kshatriya, interestingly, means not just a warrior in the martial sense. This is the aspect that is spoken of throughout the Vedic scriptures that people always miss. It also means to be a leader. It means to be a political leader, a leader of a nation, a leader of the state. In other words, someone who has the ability, as a result of their true courage, as a result of their true vision, their dedication to fight for good, that they have the ability, even politically, to rouse the people around them to indeed work for good, to fight for good, to make this world into a better place. And now, let me answer this last sentence that you have here, and then I just want to say one last thing about this. You ask, will divine appointed leadership emerge before then to rally behind? Yes, they're here now. Yes, leaders are arising. Leaders are arising indeed. I say very, very, very humbly, I'm one of the people who is training these leaders. I think people know I have a movement called the International Sanatana Dharma Society. It's a global movement of individuals who are following the path that we've been speaking about tonight, that is Sanatana Dharma. And our movement has grown exponentially to the point where we have people in 70 nations throughout the world. And one of the primary things that we do and that I do is indeed to train the leadership of the future. And it's not a joke. We are truly training the individuals who you are asking about. We're training the individuals who in the future will be leaders of their nations. So indeed, there will be leaders who are rising. Talk about perfect timing. Krishna Prasada, one of my students, arrived here a short time ago and gave me a copy, which I haven't even seen yet, because I guess the author is the last person to be sent a copy of my latest book that's come out, Principles of Perfect Leadership. This book quite literally came out about a week ago or so, and it's available now. Principles of Perfect Leadership. It's available just on Amazon if you go there. And indeed, that's what this book is about, how to be a perfect leader. Those leaders are arising. They're in the world today. Some of them are active. You may know a few of them. The vast majority are not active yet. They will become activated when the time is right. And indeed, this leads to, with your indulgence, Philosophicat, the last thing I wanted to say about this, which is very important, and that is, while saying that the Kali Yuga is indeed 432,000 years in length and we're only at the beginning, this may sound very discouraging, but no, we have to understand that even within the context of those 432,000 years, there are cycles within the cycle. There are ups and downs. There are mini golden ages that occur even within the Kali Yuga. Indeed, Prabhupada spoke about this. Many other gurus have spoken about this. The Brahma Vaivarta Purana speaks about this as well. Other places speak about this. And for those who know me and my work, you know that I talk about this all the time. We are about to enter into one of these mini golden ages in which, indeed, evil is going to be defeated on our planet, and we are going to see Dharma ascend yet again. We're going to see the way of the gods become prevalent upon the earth again. And this is why never lose hope. On the contrary, we have a mini golden age that is going to be happening. And for most of us who are young enough, we will see the beginnings of it in our lifetime.
My mouse isn't working there. Thank you for that. So we're kind of coming up towards the end of our time. I've got, maybe we'll make this the last question. It's kind of a two-part question because I saw he's sort of asked two similar questions. So first of all, Augustine Fan asks if you respect any Catholic saints. I would assume probably you have a few in mind. And he also wants to know if you would approve of the worship of Greek and Roman gods or veneration of Catholic saints like Francis of Assisi.
Excellent question and excellent name, Augustine fan. Actually, I'm kind of an Augustine fan also. I read the Confessiones many times. That is the Confessions, the autobiography of Augustine. Yeah, he was truly a wonderful philosopher. He was more of a Platonist than anything. So very interesting person, philosophically speaking. Theologically, on the other hand, we have major disagreements. But to answer your question, I'm sorry, what was there a first question before this one? Can I see the first one again?
Yeah, he asked if there were any Catholic saints that you respected, I think was the word he gave.
I see. Very good.
See if I can find it again. Yeah, do you respect any Catholic saints?
Yes, certainly. And I wouldn't so much call them even Catholic saints, but Catholic mystics. In fact, for that matter, not just Catholic, but certainly there have been several very early, let's say, Christian mystics, individuals who indeed did seem to have a unio mystica, that is an experience of divine union with God, who, when you look at their lives, you see that indeed they did seem to be experiencing God. So, of course, yes, there are certainly individuals who very specifically are the mystics, that is, individuals who truly had experiences of God, who I would represent. You mentioned Francis of Assisi. He indeed would be one of them. He is an individual who, even though he was born in a Christian context, so therefore, he had to practice the religion that he knew, which was Catholicism. He was born in Italy. He was born in an ocean of Catholicism. So thus he practiced the religion he knew. He practiced it in a very sincere, very yogic way, actually. So, for example, many people don't know this. Francis of Assisi was a vegetarian. For example, he had many, again, unio mystica, experiences of divine union with God, etc. So indeed, there are some individuals within the context of Christianity who, as individuals, you can see they were quite close to God. And now to answer your second question, would I approve of the worship of Greek or Roman gods? Let me stop there with that clause until I answer the second part. As far as all of the pre-Christian European pantheons, indeed, I approve of the worship of all of them. Not only approve, I encourage, actually. So this is why, indeed, for individuals who in the present day are following Hellenismos, for example, or Religio Romana, who are following, indeed, ancient Greek, ancient Roman religion, and they are venerating those pantheons, indeed, we encourage this, because we see these pantheons as really non-different from the Vedic pantheon. A few differences here and there, but as far as the important gods, we see them as non-different from the Vedic pantheon. And for that matter, this is true for the Norse gods, for the Slavic gods, for the Celtic gods, etc. So indeed, we encourage people. As far as veneration of Catholic saints, again, I would qualify this simply by saying that not all Catholic saints, absolutely not, because there were some who sadly were not really let's say spiritually good people, but who were more like missionaries who converted people to Christianity, and they're venerated for that reason, and they shouldn't be. But you mentioned again Francis of Assisi. Indeed, he is someone who should be respected and venerated as what he was, and that was a very pure soul, indeed a saint, a sage. So I hope that answers the question. Very good.
Oh, there we go.
Oh, you froze for a moment. I thought I was going to have to end the show myself.
No, everything disappeared. I thought you were gone. Sorry about that. We'll blame the cat. Probably something he stepped on. Yes, sorry about all his interruptions.
Oh, don't.
Clearly, I need to go and attend to his needs.
Yeah, we all love Oslo. Don't worry about it.
Oh, he's got this feather toy that he loves. It finally arrived in all my boxes and everything. It was the first thing he pulled out when I got his box. And if I don't remember to like put it up and away at night, he drags it out and just continually drops it on my face all night long, trying to wake me up to play with him. He's like, this is actually him being good. He's like, I love him to death, but he's insufferable.
Yeah. he's being very respectful of the topic under discussion this evening.
Well, I mean, he was pretty good. He was coming up and like giving kisses and stuff rather than biting me. So, I'll take it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's probably a good place to wrap up. And you've been more than generous with your time. So thank you so much, Acharya ji, for being here and for sharing your expertise on the Bhagavad Gita, as well as answering people's questions. I do hope this was valuable to people. And I know we didn't get to everybody's question. That seems to be the nature of every stream you do, though, more questions than time. But hopefully we can have you back one day and people will get another chance to ask. And I know you do weekly streams yourself, and I've put the links to your YouTube channel as well as your website in the description. So people, I would encourage you to go check that out. Sit in on Acharyaji's. It's Monday evening live streams, isn't it?
Yes, generally Monday evenings at 7 p.m. we have a live stream on YouTube on our Dharma Nation channel.
7 Central, isn't it?
Yes, yeah. Central time. Yeah, I'm in Omaha, Nebraska currently.
Okay, yeah. So you guys can go check those out. I know you talk about quite a wide variety of Vedic concepts, different Vedic texts. You do typically leave plenty of time for questions and answers at the end of those streams. And I think you've got a Discord community as well, so people might be interested in checking that out. But yes, thank you so much for joining me tonight. It was, a little bit different to me just sitting here chatting to myself in front of the camera. So it was good fun, and I hope you enjoyed it too.
I did very much, and thank you so much for having me on here. And if you can give me 20 seconds, I just want to tell people, for all of you who are out there, I have followed Philosophicat's work for years, actually. Before we even knew each other, interestingly, I had been following her work. I want to just ask everyone out there to please support her work in every way that you can. Because indeed, the work that she's doing, especially with the Revolt series, Revolt Against the Modern World, and so much that she's done. She's doing very, very important work in her own right. So in every way that you can, please continue to support her channel, and all the wonderful things that she's doing.
Oh, thank you. We should have a new Revolt episode out within probably the next couple of weeks. George is burning the midnight oil to get it done, so we're looking forward to releasing that.
Wonderful.
Have you got any projects or anything that you'd like to just mention to people? I think you've got a new book out, and I think another one coming, or a conference coming up. So do you want to tell people about those and where they can get information on that?
An hour? No, I'm
Give us the elevator pitch.
Yes, I'm working on many books. The next one to come out is going to be a shorter work. It's going to be about 100 pages. It's called Interregnum, and it's based on a talk that I gave talking about what is true rulership, what it means to be a true and virtuous ruler of a nation versus what we have now, which is its opposite. And again, that book will be available probably in about 6 weeks or so. But again, the book that just came out a week ago is this one, which is Principles of Perfect Leadership. And again, it's available on Amazon. You can get it there. It's very inexpensive. We don't have the Kindle version out just yet. We will in hopefully a few days, but certainly the print version is available. And that's it. Again, many other things, but those are the main things that people should know.
Yes, and they can, of course, keep up with all of your different projects in their various stages if they follow your channel. So I think we'll close it out now. I'm starting to get eaten by bugs too. It's getting to be that time of night. So between the bugs and the cats and all that, I think God's given me a sign here. I need to go back to my air-conditioned room, which is hopefully fixed now. But thank you so much. Thank you, everybody in the chat, for being here and for your really great and thoughtful questions. Sorry we couldn't get to them all. And we'll see you next time. And please do check out Acharya Ji's channel. Good night, everybody, and namaste.
Namaste.